Welcome to NightStoryX Fear, where every whisper hides a secret and every story leaves a scar. If you dare to listen, then like, share, and subscribe before the darkness takes you. And tell us in the comments what haunts you the most. NightStoryX Fear, where fear never sleeps.
Story 1. The House That Ate Color. Vermont, USA. My name is Elias Thorne, and my expertise lies in architectural anomalies, specifically how environment affects the human psyche. The most disturbing house I ever entered wasn't old or grand. It was a simple, stark, saltbox structure built in 1980, tucked away in the secluded, snow-dusted hills of Vermont. I started renting it in the bleak chill of early 2019 to investigate its bizarre whispered reputation that it was haunted by an entity that didn't just drain life, but drained color itself. The house, locally nicknamed the Monochrome, was unnerving from the instant I drove up. Inside and out, every surface, walls, floors, ceiling, even the light switches was coated in a thick, uniform layer of industrial neutral gray. The previous owner, a retired painter known for his vibrant abstract work, had vanished without a trace 6 months prior, leaving only this bizarre color scheme behind. The deed was signed over by a nervous lawyer, and the silence that greeted me was heavy, chemical, and absolute. The first sensory assault was the cold. Not the natural, biting Vermont chill, but a deep, optical cold that seemed to absorb light and heat. I set up my equipment immediately. Spectral analyzers, infrared thermometers, and my own high-resolution color charts taped to the walls. The charts confirmed my unsettling hypothesis. Within the house, colors registered as perceptibly muted, their chroma levels slowly dropping over a 24-hour cycle. A vibrant red sample I placed on the mantel was undeniably duller, turning towards a muddy, blackish maroon. The psychological attack began subtly. I'd leave a new, vibrant orange stress ball on the kitchen counter, only to find it hours later a dull, sickly brown, looking ancient and spoiled. My bright, primary blue hiking backpack faded to a dusty slate gray overnight. It was terrifyingly slow, but relentless. The house was slowly sucking the vibrancy out of everything I owned. One evening, I reviewed my camera footage. I had focused a time-lapse camera on a small potted sunflower I'd brought in, a splash of yellow rebellion against the pervasive gray. In the footage, the petals didn't wilt or decay. They simply faded. The rich yellow slowly drained out, leaving the petals a pale, sickly bone white, and finally a soft, oppressive, neutral gray. It was like watching a ghost erase a photograph, frame by silent frame. That night, alone in the suffocating gray, I realized the house was not haunted by a person, but by a hungry void, an entity defined by the absence of sensory input. Around 2 a.m., the profound silence was broken by a faint, rhythmic sound, a soft, metallic clicking coming from the vacant guest bedroom down the hall. It was slow, quiet, and persistent, the rhythmic sound of an old manual camera shutter firing over and over, steadily documenting the house's slow decay. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the sound. As I stepped onto the landing, the chilling optical cold intensified. The hallway seemed to physically darken, the shadows deepening into impossible blackness. When I shone the light down the hole, the beam itself looked weak, muted, as if its intensity was being filtered through a thick, gray film. I reached the door to the guest room and pushed it open. The clicking stopped instantly. The room was empty, cold, and utterly still. But on the far wall, where I had taped a large, pristine white calibration sheet, I saw it. The sheet was no longer white. It was now a uniform soot gray, and across the center, a single, clear, hand-drawn mark had appeared. A crude, unsettling sketch of a wide-eyed face. The eyes were massive, black, and completely devoid of pupil, iris, or soul. Just empty sockets drawn in thick charcoal. I backed out slowly, my pulse hammering. I knew I hadn't drawn it. I knew the wall was clean 12 hours ago. But as I watched, transfixed, the charcoal lines on the sheet seemed to deepen and darken, the gray becoming richer, more concentrated. The terrifying sketch was literally feeding on the surrounding white and the light I provided. The next night, the clicking returned, louder and closer, now emanating from beneath the floorboards, directly below my bed. When I cautiously peered over the edge, the space was absolute blackness, darker than any shadow, and from that profound black, a whisper, dry and papery, brushed against my ear. You bring the light. You bring the feast. Stay for the final focus. I scrambled back, shining my powerful lamp down. The clicking stopped, but when I looked at my own arm under the harsh beam, the skin was wrong. It looked subtly desaturated, a shade paler, its natural tone dulled to a near monochrome. My blood rushed cold. I realized the monochrome entity was not just feeding on the color of objects or the light of the sun. It was feeding on the color of life itself, slowly erasing me to complete its terrifying, growing gallery of gray. I fled that morning. When the authorities eventually investigated the house, they found my equipment, my clothing, and even the now dead sunflower, all rendered in various shades of lifeless gray. The calibration sheet on the wall was gone, but etched permanently into the gray paint beneath it was the unsettling charcoal sketch, black, permanent, and staring. The final horror wasn't seeing a ghost. It was realizing that I had almost become one of its muted masterpieces. I had spent 2 weeks in a house being slowly unmade. And somewhere in the Vermont hills, the house that ate color is still standing, eternally hungry for the next bright thing to walk through its gray, silent doors.
Story 2. The Librarian's Final Chapter. Massachusetts, USA. This is the account of the Vance estate in Marblehead, Massachusetts, a sprawling Queen Anne mansion that housed a secret more terrifying than any phantom: the impossible library. In the fall of 2011, I was hired under a non-disclosure agreement to catalog the massive book collection of the late Eleanor Vance, a wealthy recluse and former librarian obsessed with order. The local rumors claimed the house was haunted by a force that didn't just move books, but rearranged reality itself. The library was the core of the haunting, a 2-story cavern, heavy with the scent of aged paper and dry vanilla. The moment I started work, the atmosphere felt oppressive, as if the very air or the intelligence within the books resented my presence. The first week was dedicated to fighting the phenomenon. I would spend hours organizing a shelf by Dewey Decimal, only to return the next morning to find the books perfectly, silently resorted. They weren't jumbled, they were indexed by a new, alien logic, perhaps by the specific weight of the paper, or the year of the author's death, or by how many times the word silence appeared in the text. It was meticulous, infuriating, and undeniably the work of an intelligent, obsessive force. My first true scare came on the 4th night. I was working late, cataloging rare manuscripts, the house utterly silent. Suddenly, a massive antique wooden ladder, which I had secured with rubber blocks against the north wall, began to move. Slowly, quietly, it slid sideways by itself on the polished wood floor, stopping precisely in front of a section of obscure 17th century texts I had deliberately avoided. I sprang up, my chair scraping the floor. The ladder stood there, perfectly still, like a silent wooden pointer. As I stared, trying to rationalize, a single book, bound in dark, unmarked, heavy leather, slowly, deliberately slid out from the middle of the shelf, dropping onto the ladder's step with a soft thud. I approached the ladder, my pulse hammering a frantic rhythm. I picked up the book. It was titled, in faded, chilling gold foil, The House of Endless Arrangement. The air in the room instantly went cold. I knew with absolute paralyzing certainty that this book
was not part of Eleanor's catalogue. I opened it. The pages were thick, antique parchment, but as my eyes scanned the first page, black ink began to bloom on the paper, drawing itself into elegant, cursive script. It wasn't writing. It was appearing as if poured from an unseen well. It read, "You are an imperfection, an error in the catalogue. Arrangement is life. Disorder is hunger. Your presence is disruptive. You must be filed." I slammed the book shut and shoved it into my satchel. The intelligence behind the haunting was communicating, and its message was a death sentence. The next night, the library turned actively hostile. I returned to find my meticulous organization completely undone. Every single book was placed with its spine facing the wall, leaving only the dull yellowed page edges visible. It was a gesture of profound, silent contempt, a wall of featureless gray that screamed disorder to me, but represented neutrality to the ghost. As I started the Sisyphean task of reordering, I heard a sound from the second-story balcony, a dry, rattling cough, immediately followed by the crisp flick of a brass light switch. I looked up. The balcony was empty, but the small desk lamp sitting on the railing table was now on, casting a stark circle of light onto a closed ledger. I climbed the narrow spiral stairs, my legs shaking. When I reached the desk, the lamp was still on. I looked at the ledger. It was Eleanor's original index, but a single new entry, written in Eleanor's unmistakable looping hand, had been added at the bottom. October 29th, 1993. Arrangement complete. I am filed. Now, who will read my final chapter? Suddenly, the floor beneath my feet felt like it was shifting. The shelves around me began to emit a low, vibrating hum. It wasn't just the books. The entire room, the very structure of the library, was being recalibrated. I looked down into the main floor of the library. Below me, on the floor where I had been working, the discarded books were no longer scattered. They were piled high, forming a low, tight concentric spiral pattern leading directly to the center of the room. And at the dead center of the spiral, standing impossibly still, was a tall, unnervingly thin figure wearing a 1940s librarian dress. She was turned away, her back rigid, her hair pulled into a severe, tight bun. I whispered, "Eleanor?" The figure didn't turn, but her voice, dry and thin as old paper, whispered, resonating through the wood and the thousands of bindings, "You are not properly filed. You must be indexed. Your biography begins now." Then, every single book in the massive library, all thousands of them, seemed to violently vibrate and lean inwards towards the spiral center. The air pressure dropped drastically, feeling like a physical weight pressing me down into the arrangement. I didn't wait to see the final chapter. I scrambled down the stairs, narrowly dodging heavy volumes that slid violently from shelves. I burst out of the house, the sickening hum of the rearranging books following me all the way to the street. I never touched a book again. I learned that the librarian's ghost hadn't stayed in the house to protect her collection. She had become the collection. The house was her final, perfect, terrifying index, and I was just an unfiled, disposable entry she was intent on correcting
before the final filing system could be closed.
Story 3: The Basement's Deep Breath, Ohio, USA. My name is David Moore, and the house we bought in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, taught me that not all hauntings are ghosts. Some are the silent, profound horror of geology. It was 2022. My partner Jess and I bought a mid-century fixer-upper, primarily because of its huge, solid stone basement, perfect for conversion into a home studio. The house was only built in 1965, so we dismissed any talk of history or ghosts. The house had nothing to do with the past. It had everything to do with the deep earth. The basement was unique. It was huge, built with black, slate-colored fieldstone, and had a strange, pervasive atmosphere. It was perpetually damp and smelt faintly of ozone and wet soil, even after months of running a commercial-grade dehumidifier. The weirdness started with the cold drafts that seemed to defy logic. They weren't coming from cracks or windows. They originated from the center of the cement floor, pushing upward, carrying that damp, earthy smell like a silent, cold exhalation. Then came the sound. Not footsteps, but something far more unsettling. The sound of a slow, wet, rhythmic exhalation. It would occur every 3 or 4 minutes, a profound, deep sigh that seemed to resonate through the entire house structure. We'd put our ears to the basement door and hear it, a sound too large to be an animal, too organic to be plumbing. It sounded like the earth itself was breathing. Jess, pragmatic to a fault, called in every expert: plumber, HVAC, structural engineer. They all found nothing. Just a pressure anomaly, one guy suggested, nervously packing his tools. I started spending more time in the basement, convinced it was a structural issue I could solve. One afternoon, while sitting in the center, waiting for the sigh, I noticed something in the black slate floor directly beneath me. A faint circle of discoloration, about 4 feet in diameter, which felt slightly warmer and smoother than the surrounding stone. I knelt down and touched it. The stone felt strangely elastic, almost soft, like sun-baked clay, despite its slate appearance. As soon as my fingers pressed against it, the sound came closer, louder, and more urgent. This time, the sound was so powerful it physically rattled my chest. The damp, earthy smell intensified, and a thick, clammy air suddenly pooled around me, dense with ozone. I pulled my hand back, feeling sick, and stumbled upstairs. That night, frantically researching the property, I found a small, heavily redacted record from a local historical society mentioning a Native American legend about the specific rise of land where the house stood, that it was a breathing place where a massive subterranean entity was said to sleep, only stirring when it felt the weight of something too organized, too rigid above it. The next day, terrified, Jess and I went down to the basement with a heavy wool rug to cover the entire circle. As we unrolled it, Jess shrieked. On the very center of the floor, right on the circle, was a single black, perfectly formed human tooth. It looked ancient, filed flat at the top, and still glistened with a dark, oily liquid. We didn't touch it. We covered the spot with the rug and fled upstairs, sealing the basement door with heavy bolts. That evening, the basement was no longer just sighing. The house began to shake violently with the sound of its inhalation. Shh. It was a vast, sickening, sucking sound, like a colossal vacuum pulling the very air and light out of the rest of the house. The windows upstairs rattled, the air went impossibly thin, and the ozone and wet earth smell permeated the entire ground floor. It felt like the house was gasping. We ran outside, watching the structure from the lawn. It stood silent for a few terrifying minutes, holding its colossal breath. Then, from the basement, came the exhalation. Whum. It was a deep, resonating seismic boom that shook the ground we stood on. A huge cloud of damp, dark, earthen-smelling vapor erupted from the basement window well, hissing out into the cold evening air, carrying with it a faint, bone-chilling sound. It was a slow, deep, guttural gurgle, like someone or something was slowly drowning in thick, icy water right there in the empty black basement. We drove away instantly. When the police investigated, they found the house untouched. The basement was exactly as we left it, except for the rug. The rug was covering the circle, but it wasn't flat. It was pushed up in the center, forming a smooth, rounded dome, and stretched tightly over the bulge, where the tooth had been, was a single dark, hair-thin crack that ran from the center of the stone circle all the way out to the basement wall, splitting the solid foundation. The investigators dismissed it as freeze damage, but I knew better. Whatever lived beneath the house had just taken a deep breath and expanded, cracking the foundation that imprisoned it. The entity wasn't a ghost. It was the house's deep breath, an ancient, breathing thing, waiting for the night to finally shed the weight of the structure above it.